welcome to Snails and Fairy Dust. I have a new bundle of patterns on my website. You can find the link below to order the bundle. And you get these 5 little charm patterns. They are brick stitch patterns, and I just wanted to show some of the trickier parts in case you are new to this technique of brick stitch. So that's what this video is for. It's meant to accompany the pattern bundle. The first one I'm going to walk you through is the ladybug. The ladybug one is actually the easiest pattern in the bundle, in my opinion. So if you are new to this, definitely start with the ladybug. I'm going to walk you all the way through that one. And once you have mastered that, the other ones will be a lot easier for you. So taking a look at your pattern, you will find the beads that I'm using. They're delicate beads. I have a size 12 beading needle that I'm using. And you can use a nylon beading thread. I love Miyuki beading thread. It's a nice silky drape. But personally, I'm going to be using my Fireline for this project. 6-pound weight Fireline. I basically use this thread for everything except for if I'm using making fringe, then I would use the nylon thread because it just has more of a flow to it. I am also using wire guards to add to the top of my charms. They're sometimes called wire guards, thread guards. Here in the UK, they call them wire guardians. And this is what they look like. If you don't have them, you could always add a beaded loop to the top of your charm, but I prefer the wire guards. It's going to make your work much stronger and make it look more professional. And you could turn it into a lot of different things, like you can make earrings, you can make a necklace, you can make a bracelet, you could make a keychain. So I think it's good to try to get your hands on some of those. So to begin, I've cut about 5 feet of my Fireline. I like to run Fireline through my fingernails to like flatten it out before I thread my needle. That will help you a lot. And then I'm going to weave a foundation row. So it's row 1 on your pattern, and that row is going to be ladder stitch. So I pick up the first 2 beads of that row, slide them down towards the end of my thread. I'm going to leave about a 3-inch tail, and then bring my needle back through the first bead. Pull that tight, and then we're going to come down the second bead, and you have something that looks like that. And in this case, I'm going to go back up through the first bead again and just reinforce this loop. So back up through the first bead and then down through the second bead again. Because this is the foundation row for our whole work, I just want it to be really strong. So I've picked up another bead, and I'm going to come down through that second bead, like so, and then back up through the new bead I've just added, through the third bead. And then I pick up another bead, and I'm going to come up through that last bead, and then down through the new bead I've just added. And again, pick up another bead, come down through the last bead I've just added, and now up through the new bead. And I'm just going to continue building on this row until I get to the end of the first row of my pattern. And in this case of this ladybug, that is 11 beads. So I'm just going to keep going along there. Make sure you're keeping the tension nice and tight between these beads. You don't want gaps. I like to hold them in between my thumb and my forefinger when I'm pulling it. That way they stay together when you're pulling your thread tight, and it really helps to keep them there. I highly recommend that technique. And so, yeah, just work your way across. Make sure you're counting and following along with your pattern. And we're almost there. And when we get to the last one, we want to make sure everything's nice and tight, and we want to make sure we have the right number. And then I want to just reinforce those last 2 beads. So I'm going to come back down through the 10th bead and then back up through the 11th bead. And then we're going to start our next row. And so the next row is decreasing brick stitch. It decreases on both ends. So I'm going to pick up the first 2 beads in that next row, and I'm going to bring my needle underneath that second little thread bridge. Those little bridges of thread on top of the beads, those are called thread bridges. So I'm just going to slide that underneath that thread bridge. Pull my thread all the way through, and you'll have something like that. And then we're going to bring our needle back up through the second bead, and down through the first bead. Just the first bead, not the one underneath. So just that one bead, bring it down through there. And then come back up through that second bead again. And when you pull that tight, you're going to have the 2 beads sitting right next to each other like that, like little bricks. So that is your first row of brick stitch. For the rest of the row, we're just going to pick up 1 bead at a time, following along with the pattern. So pick up my next bead, and I come underneath that next thread bridge, and then straight back up through that bead. And then pull that one tight. And then we're going to do that again. So we're picking up 1 bead at a time, pick it up, come underneath the next thread bridge, and then back up through that bead. Now this first row is the trickiest because you just don't have a lot to hold on to, but make sure you're holding onto your work tight. You see the little beads are even indented in my fingers there. And also, if your ladder stitch row is very tight, which it should be, then it could be a little tricky to get your needle underneath those thread bridges, but just persevere. You can do this. Take your time. And you see in this pattern, you'll notice on your pattern there are 2 types of red beads. There's one that has a luster, which has the L's on it in your pattern, and then one which is a brick red. You could obviously just use one type of red, but I thought it just made it look a bit more like a bug. It gave it some more dimension. So don't worry if you mess up with one of those red beads and accidentally put the wrong one. It's really just for the look of it. So I'm going to continue adding 1 bead along. I'm 1 bead at a time. I'm following along with my pattern. And when I get to that last one, I bring my needle back up, and I'm ready to start a new row. And this is what you should have. And so I'm going to flip it around because I always like to hold it in my non-dominant hand and work away from that hand. And then I'm going to start my next row. So again, it's starting on a decrease. So I'm picking up 2 beads. I just want to show you this again. 2 beads coming underneath the second thread bridge. And then I come back up through the second bead, down through the first bead, and back up through that second bead again. And then for the rest of this row, you should have your technique by now. We're just adding 1 bead at a time and following along to the end of the row. And make sure you're looking at your pattern and you're starting in following your beads in the direction of the arrows on your pattern. That's an important thing. And then as we move along, we are going to take a look at some of the other techniques in this particular pattern. Like some of the rows start or end on an increase. So we'll take a look at that in a second. So here we are with our 3rd row complete. And on this next row, you see at the end of the row, it's the purple dot, which means it ends on the second bead of the row. So here I am finishing that one. And all that means in this case is that you just don't continue to the end. So I'm going to leave that last thread bridge open. And that's all you have to do for that. And then you just turn your work around and start working brick stitch in the opposite way, still with decreasing. You'll see on the pattern that there are certain dots for decreasing, certain dots for increasing, and if you follow along with them, you'll be fine. And in a second, I am going to show you how to increase at the end of the row. So at the end of this row, it asks for an extra bead, and we don't have another thread bridge. So when you have to increase like that, you're going to share the thread bridge of the previous bead. So you see, I just went under that same thread bridge that the last bead was using, and then I come right back up through that bead. And there, now we've added the little tip of this guy's wing. And then I would just turn my work over and continue weaving in the opposite direction. And this next row is a pretty straightforward row. It's just decreasing on both ends. And then for the last row, we're going to be starting on the second bead of the row. So to look at that, we are going to have to bring our needle down, bring it down through that second bead, and then we're going to come back up at a diagonal to exit that second bead, because that's the bead we want to start this row on. Okay, so we should have something like that. And then we add those last 3 beads of that side of the pattern. So it's a decreasing brick stitch, so starting on the second. So it'll be the second thread bridge from where your thread is exiting. So we have this technique down by now. And this row just gets 3 beads. And that side of our guy is done. So now we're going to bring our needle down to the bum of the beetle, the bum of the ladybug. So you're going to weave your thread all the way down to the end. And you know where your original tail is? That's the front. That's the head. So the opposite of where the thread is going to be the little bum of your ladybug here. So just to weave down, just go 1 bead at a time and weave your way over to that outside edge. So here I am, I'm going to have to go down and then up and then down again to get to that place. And then from there, I'm just going to follow my pattern and work in the opposite direction with the brick stitch techniques that we've already worked on for the first side. And you're just going to weave all the way down to the end. So it'll be pretty similar to the first side. Just make sure you're following your pattern so your little spots end up in the right place. And I'm not going to bore you by showing you 1 bead at a time here, but we're just slowly working our way to the other end. Make sure things are matching up as you go along. Make sure you're taking a look at your pattern and you haven't made any major mistakes. And just keep working your way slowly. If you're just thinking about 1 bead at a time, taking a breath, it's completely doable. If you're new to this, I believe in you. You could definitely do this. Just take your time. Here we have that increase again. Just wanted you to see that technique again. So you share that same thread bridge, go right under, and then come back. There you go. And then we finish it off here. And now we are going to add the wire guard at the top. And before I do that, I'm going to take that original little thread end, put it on a needle, and then I'm just going to weave that into my work and then snip it. So you're weaving back and forth. You could create tension by going through 2 beads at a time. Make sure you're pulling it tight so your thread disappears between the beads. And then you could clip it. And this is what we're going to do next. We're going to add that little wire guard. So I need to get up to those beads at the top of his little head. And to do that, I'm just going to go through these beads, weave my way through. If you see that little thread there, that's because I didn't pull that tight enough. There's a little white thread peeking out. Sometimes it's hard for me to see exactly what I'm doing when I'm looking at the camera rather than my actual work. So don't let that happen to you. Make sure you're pulling your thread tightly so those threads disappear in between the beads. And I need to get up to that bead you'll see in your diagram It's sort of in the top 3 ones, it's the, the outside edge of the 3. And I'm going to come in towards the center, like so. And then I'm going to add my thread guard, wire guard. If you're using beads, then this is where you would add your beads. If you are using beads to make a loop, I recommend using smaller round beads. So here we are. I make sure your thread stays in that little channel on the wire guard, because otherwise it's not gardening anything. So take your time and make sure it ends up in there. And you're coming down the opposite side and into that opposite bead like that. And I always reinforce the wire guard. So you're going to come back up through the beads below. You just want to be exiting the same way that original thread exited. So take what other path you need to get there. And then come back up through that wire guard and down through the opposite side. Don't be afraid to turn your work around like this. I mean, it just makes your life easier. Yeah, some people just get stuck. You can move around, make your life easier. Also, in terms of sort of weaving back through beads, you want to be able to turn your work around. So you don't want to force things. These beads will break if you force your way through them. So if you need to turn to get a better angle to get your needle through, then do that. And now I'm just weaving in my end. Again, going back and forth, sort of weaving around beads, creating tension so that thread isn't going to go anywhere. And if you have the right size needle, you should be able to pass through these beads several times. But if you ever feel like you have to force it, then try to find a different path to go, because you don't want to break your bead. And there we go. We have our first charm done. I can make a cute little pair of earrings with those. I mean, there's so many things we could do with these charms. I'm very excited about them. And I just wanted to show you, this is one of my prototypes. I decided to get rid of the antenna, but you could see that I used really small size 15 Miyuki rounds to make my loop on that one. So that is an option if you would prefer. So I just wanted you to see what that looked like. Now for the Forget-Me-Not charm, there is a tricky bit where we have to add an extra bead in a row. And then also these rows, several of these rows start with increasing brick stitch rather than decreasing. So I just wanted you to see what it looks like to start the row on an increase. So here I am starting my row, and I have my 2 beads, but I'm coming through the first thread bridge rather than the second. So I'm just coming through that first thread bridge and then bring my needle right up back through that second bead. And that's all you have to do. There's no more looping around. That's it. That's done. Easy. Increases are much easier than decreases. And then for the rest of that row, I would just go with regular single brick stitch like we have been doing. And yeah, and I want you to see at the end of the row, there's an increase. And so we share that thread bridge like we did in the ladybug, and that gives you your increase at the end. And then, so on this one, I need to add an extra row to the increase. So again, I'm starting on that first thread bridge, come back up through the second bead, and now I'm going to come down through the first bead, and I need to add an extra bead there. So pick up the other bead, and then I'm going to come down through that outside bead. Basically, it's a ladder stitch. So you're going to add on extra beads with a ladder stitch like that. And then I'm going to come back up through the new bead I've added. Keep that tight. Don't worry if it's a little crooked now, but just make sure it's tight. And then I'm going to come down through the first bead and then back up through that second bead. And now I'm just going to weave the rest of that row as a regular brick stitch until we get to the end of the row, and then we need to do another little tricky add-on there. So now I'm just adding one at a time till I get to the end of this row. And take your time here. With these trickier patterns, it's just a matter of looking at the pattern while you're doing it. I've messed up a few times myself, and I wrote the patterns, so just make sure you're going in the right direction. So here I am. I'm adding the one extra increase, which we should be good at that by now. We did that with the ladybug, but I need to add another bead. So I'm adding the second bead, and I'm just adding it on like a little ladder stitch there. And then I'm going to come down through that new bead I've added. And then back up through the one right before it. Sorry, I came out of the camera there. And you have something that looks like that. And now we want to get our thread to come back up that outside edge one. So the one at the very outside edge, we need to get back over there. So in order to do that, we're going to weave down and then come back up. You could do this however you want, as long as you end up exiting that bead, but I'm going to show you how I chose to get there. So I'm coming down at an angle and then back up through an angle, exiting that third bead again. There we go. So we're just going to exit that third bead and then come down through the second one and up through that first one. And now we're ready to just start weaving brick stitch again. And when you're all done, you have these cuties. Okay, so there's one more technique I wanted to show you, and that is adding the little stinger at the bottom of this bee and also adding his antenna. So for the antenna and the stinger, I'm using a size 15 Miyuki round bead, and they are a smaller bead. So I just want to show you in comparison to the 11 Delica. So that's the Delica, and you see 2 15s are the size, almost the size of one Delica. So that is a difference there, and it just gives you a bit more of a delicate finish. You'll see on your pattern that you need to add your wire guard. Just follow the path on the pattern. But then here we are going to add the antenna. So I pick up 5 beads, and then I pull those 5 beads down. And then I'm going to hold the first bead in my finger and come through the last 4 beads and that bead that we were exiting. And when I pull that down, it's going to give us a cute little antenna. It's basically a little tiny row of fringe. And then I need to come back out that other bead. So I'm going to weave my way down and then back up and exit that outside one. And repeat the same process. So pick up our 5 round beads, size 15. Slide them down, hold that first bead, and then come through the 4. And there you have his cute little bee head. I love it. And so then you just work your way down, and you're going to work the other half of that pattern until you get to the last row of down by his bum. And then you're going to come down through the second bead in that row once you finished it. And then up through the third bead. And you're just going to add 3 little size 15s. And then bring your needle back down through that second bead again. And then just reinforce that. Go back through that same path to reinforce the little stinger. I tried to make it a friendly stinger. My first pattern, the bum was a bit too pointy, and my daughter said I needed to make it more of a bumblebee than a mean bee. So he has a cute little bum there. I love those little beads, how they just look at the bottom there. And then after that, you just weave your thread in and end it like we did the other ones. And I think those are the most complicated parts of these patterns. Let me know if you have any troubles, but I think they're really fun. I hope you'll enjoy it. I hope you guys will let me know what you make. It could even be a cute like charm bracelet if you added all of them, or like a charm necklace. I think it's a really fun little set of patterns and they come together quickly. So I hope you will enjoy it. All right, bye.